Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Out of Sight, a podcast show aiming to raise awareness about disabilities and special needs. We're exploring areas of inclusion and accessibility within our community. On today's episode, I'm your host, Sarah Hamza, and with me is a very lovely guest, Dr. Sayyid Ali Naqvi. Dr. Sayyid Ali Naqvi, just a bit of background on him, is an internationally renowned psychologist and a writer who has worked locally and internationally with governments, corporations, and foundations for more than 35 years. He has significant professional and academic experience of research, teaching, training, and leading and supervising psychology in universities and higher education institutions in corporate defense and armed forces, and in the government and public sectors. He has a number of research publications on various dimensions of human behavior and change with special focus on PTSD. In addition to his 8 published books, he developed the first stress management field manual for armed forces of Pakistan. His clinical work evidences his successful work with patients with mild to very complex and challenging mental health problems from diverse cultural, ethnic and linguistic backgrounds. His major areas of expertise are PTSD and social anxiety. He has been working for the NHS for the last 16 years, and he is currently working as professional and strategic lead for common mental disorders for BND and Harvering IAPT Services, London. So, mashallah, Dr. Sayyid Ali Naqvi, that is a very extensive bio, and there's so much for us to learn from you today, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
So the topic we want to discuss today is extremely broad, but why don't we dive straight into it? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your career, what you do, and what you see?
Yeah, I think you have told a lot of, mashallah, about me, and thank you very much for your nice introduction. My orientation is with clinical psychology, and definitely clinical psychology is a very broad discipline.
Yeah.
It covers a lot of areas in relation to mental health, and definitely there's a more need of community awareness on mental health issues. So this is the thing, and I think today's topic, as you have invited, is more of a in terms of community, how we can address issues those are related to people with special needs. So I think we have to look into this area or issue from 3 perspectives or 3 steps, I can say. First thing is knowledge and awareness about the problem. And when we talk about people with special needs, we have really massive knowledge gaps among the community and people and parents and family members. And that's the major barrier. Because again, it's a very famous saying, the knowledge is the power. And if we don't have knowledge or understanding about or identification about the problem, that means that we would struggle to really resolve that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about special needs, it's a whole spectrum of special needs.
Yeah.
And usually our communities would be more focused or attentive to if someone comes with physical or identifiable special need,
Definitely.
which is mostly physical disability. I usually avoid to use term disability because this is quite a stigmatized term. It's special needs. And I think that awareness, if something is unusual with one of our family members, the first port of action is to actually try to not to ignore that. And because that is indicative of some special need of a person who is our loved one, we need to attend, because a lot of time is wasted in our communities on really understanding what the problem is.
Yeah.
So that's the first step. And I think for understanding, you need to be always looking for professional advice. And to start with, we need to be able to talk about the problem rather than trying to withhold or hide that or not to share with others, that's the major barrier. Actually, we are restricting our knowledge and understanding about a problem by not talking
By not
about that.
talking about it, yeah.
So, and there is, we need to really be mindful about anything which is unusual, unconventional, which is a bit disturbing in one way or the other way. We need not to ignore that, and we need to be very positively, because that behavior or need is an alarm for us to pay attention to that loved one who is maybe crying for help or indicating that some help is needed, and we need professional knowledge. And again, when we talk about special needs, as I've discussed, there's a whole spectrum. Some are very subtle and minor mental health related or intellectual abilities related needs. Some are quite visible. So when we talk about a special need or disability, it's not one-off thing. So that's why we cannot use one criteria. The next, I think, step is acceptance of that phenomenon, which is a massive area. Acceptance in the sense that if we find that someone is not behaving the way we should be expecting or we are expecting to behave, mostly children before adult years, we usually feel really embarrassed about that. Our first reaction is not to accept, deny that. Oh, no, this is not. And we try to really wrap up or cover up the problem rather than try to understand. And we deal with the problem in emotional manner and emotional way, which is never helpful. So I think first step is to come out of denial and look into that and again ask for the help. And help means trying to understand, trying to know a bit more about that. If this is a problem or causing a problem to me, what can I know about that? Our emotional reactions are the major barrier. We don't accept. And there are different notions behind not accepting that. Some very common exception, like belief about these things is it's a punishment from God. Or we have been put into a test. It's our bad luck. And it's not just like Asian community. Unfortunately, this notion you can find in even Western societies, Christian and Jewish populations as well. If someone comes with special needs and they are not the normal in conventional sense individual or human being, we would think this is our punishment. We have been punished. So the first thing is that we go into a guilt feeling and inflated sense of responsibility, and that is the major barrier for us. So acceptance means we need to come out of these philosophical myths, I would say, that actually this is punishment of God, or this is our bad luck, or something is terribly wrong, or it is result of our sins which we have done, which is not true basically.
Yeah.
I would just say that each and every human being is a unique human being, and if we look at a given period of time or across the history, none of the two human beings were alike 100%. Within one family, there are different human beings. Every individual is different. And so their needs would be different. In the similar way, needs can, like for example, if I look at my needs were different 10 years back. And before 10 years, those needs were different. Definitely some basic needs are the same, but even things would change. In the similar way, every human being with some common needs, basic needs, they have some special needs as well. So if we look from that perspective, we can see the special person who has come into the family or who has been part of it, they have special needs. And we need to understand those needs rather than blaming ourselves. If something is because of sin or because of... And some people usually mothers, fathers, sisters, wife, husbands, they become really emotionally so much focused on one individual, they just cross off their own lives. Like I have been spending most of my time in relation to special needs for the last 5-10 years with carers and
Yeah.
the people who actually look after those people. And unfortunately, our systems are not quite like fully equipped to help those people, those are looking after other people.
Yeah.
So their needs are more of a like ignored or
Yeah.
neglected.
It's a very interesting point that you raised about sometimes, and even on this show, we focus a lot about the patient or the individual that has the special needs or the disability, and how the outer community serves them, or how the family serves them, or how uh, how they live their lives, and all of that is very, very important to know and to understand and to appreciate. Like you said, kind of education is power and knowledge is power, like you mentioned. But when you're through your experience of actually speaking to the carers of the patients that have special needs or disability, you get to see a different perspective, right? And you get to see the important perspective of the well-being of the carer,
Yeah,
because you
yeah,
can't care for someone
yeah,
if you don't care for yourself.
exactly, exactly.
So tell us a little bit more about the well-being of carers and
Yeah,
how that works.
it's very interesting. The carer roles are very important, like in terms of the quality of care that would be delivered or the individual's needs would be met, like special needs would be better met if carer needs are realized or met in a better way. And as you have mentioned, absolutely, I would agree that if someone doesn't look after themselves or cannot look after themselves, they are, I think, less qualified to look after another human being.
Yeah.
So I think carer needs, unfortunately, the systems, our systems here in UK, though the most neglected, as I mentioned, people are carers. Like, and a lot of steps are being taken to really help those people. No, those people are, in my experience, more vulnerable and in a miserable state than actual the person who is in need of
Yeah.
something special because of some disability or some handicap or deficiency or some uniqueness, I would say.
Uniqueness. Yeah.
And again, as I mentioned, usually in our communities, we are potentially more able to help. We have dormant support systems, those we need to really reinstate to help. Instead of that, one person would become dependent, and in a way, care of a person would become really solely responsibility of one person, and usually those people would be who suffer more of a guilt feeling. There's some ways, some in some respect they haven't done something right, or something is really as a punishment for them, so they become really a human being who would be suffering inflated sense of responsibility, guilt all the time, and they would either ignore themselves, like they would ignore themselves, but either they would ignore some realistic needs of the special people, or they would do sometimes over. So, and the disadvantage would go to the actually person who is in need of that. I can give you example. Generally in society, the most discriminated among the most discriminated groups of people are people with learning disabilities. And unfortunately, it's very interesting and very harsh to say, our carers unwittingly or unwillingly promote or support that exclusion,
That's very interesting.
sometime out of overprotection, sometime out of, and they keep them out of the loop. Like, for example, a special person with special needs, they have their own concept of happiness. They have their own values, religious, social, they cannot take the box in the same way like other family members are doing, but they have their own space, time, and way of. So we need to explore those values rather than excluding them. What happens? Our carer would, out of love, out of care, they would promote disability. Unfortunately, not everyone I'm taking, but majority unwittingly, out of their again inflated and heightened sense of responsibility and guilt, they would actually exclude the human being from the mainstream. A lot of things that people can do. So we need to revisit and think, okay, for example, we don't think that a disabled person who is physically immobile can have anything to do with football.
Yeah, football, yeah.
This is a common myth. But,
Yeah,
but the
yeah.
problem is, if we take football as a value, for example, value is a spectrum, the way you can actually fulfill your value. And a disabled person can enjoy football
Yeah.
rather than if we completely say, no, no, this is not for you. This is not for. So this exclusion happens in our community. And again, we hide things from each other. It's very sad. We suffer in isolation. Majority, 99% of the carer, they suffer massive depression, generalized anxiety disorder, which is actually constant and frequent worries, uncontrollable worries, and overdoing or like, and they just cross off their own lives. They don't enjoy. If something comes to them as happiness or even smile, they feel guilty about that. So this is the situation.
Yeah. And I think you spoke a little bit about the mindset behind it. So you spoke a little bit about the deniability mindsets, and sometimes the carers are denying,
Yeah.
or maybe that's just the first impression, or that's how they deal, or that's their coping mechanism sometimes at the beginning. And then you just mentioned this avoidance mindset
Yeah.
of kind of just avoiding dealing on their own in isolation, which is very
yeah.
unfortunate
Very
because more often than not, people are willing to help, but someone has to seek out first, right? So how, in your experience, how do carers come out from this avoidance mindset into kind of an acceptance mindset, and then are able to share that responsibility or the burden of responsibility,
Yeah.
and then help themselves, help the person they're caring for, and the rest of their family too?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is that, which people are not aware, people need to link with community resources, like-minded, or they need to link with people. Like, for example, we set up some carer groups, and carer groups were anyone who is a carer, they can come and they can talk every week. And that protected time was a space where people would come and they would be feeling normalized and really coming out of that guilt feeling. It is because of it is their faith, they have to live with that. And so we need to explore community support options also. And also we need to increase as professionals further support options. This is coming together, talking about that rather than trying not to talk about that. Again, a carer has a responsibility to look after the person, but also to raise awareness to other family members, inviting them to take responsibilities. And again, respecting the individual. Why, like if one person is devoted to look after a person in a family who is with special needs, that is actually not helpful to the person who is in need of that. Not only for carer, but also the person. So I think, again, speaking about that, looking for community resources, and we need to come out of stigma to really talk about that. This is not a punishment of God. This is something a unique human being would come with some special needs, and needs are different for everyone. Many times these are not quite visible difference in needs, but majority of the time a human being is different in many areas at different periods of time, and we need to really accept that. This is accept. And again, not thinking a disabled person or person with special needs, they cannot do a lot of things. Those decisions shouldn't be made by ourselves. We need to be really flexibly thinking and thinking that what they can do. Like as believers, I think we should be more optimistic and more able to accept that actually if God has created, there's a reason. God hasn't created any human being to punish other human being. I haven't come across any narrative in any religious teaching that God would create a person who would be a pain or punishment to other people. So, I think we need to be taking really this acceptance mode, and from religious point of view, from social point of view, the moment we have accepted, and also taking, like just discharging this sense of responsibility. No one is responsible. Things would happen. This is life, and human life is very complex phenomena. We need to be accepting. We need to be making adjustments, but at the same time, looking after ourselves with the aim that if we look after ourselves, we would be better able to look after the person who is in need of like care.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you bring up the concept of religion, and especially being part of the Muslim community and the Shia community. Sometimes it's, and we've spoken about this in previous episodes, about the whole concept of tawakkul and leaving it to God, and kind of having God as a guidance. And this whole punishment mindset, I've seen it in the community, and I've seen some people think that, oh, why is God punishing? Or why is, and this is for all tribulations, not even sometimes just as maybe parents of children. But I've also spoken to a lot of parents that will say that, you know, my child that might have a learning disability or any sort of other disability, they'll say that their child is actually their biggest blessing. And that they can't imagine their life without their child, and it's brought them a lot of kind of blessings. So there's the whole concept of religion when it comes to caring for a child with disabilities or even any other sort of patient. What is your kind of view on when it comes to faith and kind of spiritual connection with God and, let's say, mental health or learning difficulties, special needs?
I think one thing we need to be very clear, the number one, accepting whoever is created is no one's fault. It can be a test, and we need to be really demonstrating sabr. And sabr doesn't mean cursing ourselves or anyone else. It's actually with a very positive attitude and attribute to move and to resolve issue. But also, another issue, which is not actually, again, majority people are doing amazingly good things. Sometimes people accept that with a very spiritual and religious and taking as a blessing, but they go into a little bit over mode where actually the practical steps are ignored. Like there are practical steps. Like if I say we need to be looking at this problem from a very holistic perspective, from religious point of view, from social point of view, from medical point of view as well. We shouldn't be just saying that this is blessing and just live and respect that, and whatever he or she says, just follow that. No, we need to be clear about their development as well. What potential they are bringing. And what we are saying blessing, what do we mean? It's not just having them as a blessing, but blessing would be in its real like meaning if we could help the person to really progress, grow, and they have their own progression concept. They have their own progression concept. Another thing I just want to mention, because which is very important, if something comes to a female human being, if they come with some special needs, then our situation in terms of would be further quite like perceived as a really terrible state of affair. We are the bad luck. And the reason is that actually with females, there's a gender problem. They won't be able to marry, or what will happen. I mean, I have seen in my personal like view is that in Bangladeshi, for example, families, and majority of the Asian cultures, They're more worried about getting them married rather than what their needs are. So you just jump straight away and start worrying about the marriage of a person, and you just deny their basic help option that they should have actually given. So for example, you're not looking into their medical need, you're not looking into this something they can benefit from the system here. They can go on to some specialist training which is there, or some intervention or some medication, but you are more worried about, oh my God, how I'm going to getting
Yeah.
this person married. And it comes, when it comes to female member of society with disabilities, also, it becomes really a painful experience. And I have seen many families really living into the vibe of emotionalism, and really something which is not helpful. It's like really a family suffering into depression. One person or two person would be especially victim of that depression and helplessness.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting point that you raise, and I think we discussed this as well about how females in general, they present very differently anyways when it comes to disabilities, like for example ADHD.
Yeah.
Females usually present very much later than male counterparts when it comes to, like for example, postpartum depression, or even like postpartum psychosis and schizophrenia. They present very differently. Whether that's something that's because of gender norms and something that society has kind of sheltered women from, God knows. But when it comes to, let's say, for example, females, you spoke about the family burden being much greater than when it comes to males in the family. How then does a family kind of deal with that burden, or how can they be empowered to kind of walk away from that stigma, or understand that stigma and deny it, basically refuse it? Because the problem with, like you mentioned, Asian families, I think, and even in the Arab communities that I'm from, there's a big problem with stigma and taboo and labels, and you run away from it, essentially. You don't address it straight on, and that causes burden on the family. It doesn't actually empower the family. And sometimes you need the skill set to address the stigma to be empowered. So how can, let's say, for example, community or even families empower themselves to kind of deal with that stigma?
I think there are different steps. Number one, people need to come out of that and start talking about that. We need to accept that. And we need to understand that what the problem is. And understanding means completely understanding from all perspective, from scientific, from medical, and then really looking into the option what the system is offering something out there. We need to really be connecting to that. Many families don't actually contact. It's very sad to mention that they don't connect with the services. And the reason is their understanding is that actually they won't be understood. Their problems are not understood fully. For example, and there are system problem as well. Like people won't understand. There is a lack of cultural competency on the part of our NHS systems as well. It's not just language barriers, but lack of understanding about the cultures. Like for example, I have come across the first fatwa would come from a known Asian or Muslim GP would be, if there is disability identification, they would say, oh, have you got married with first cousin? So this statement, like, and this is which actually bounces back many Asian families. So what I have seen helping, I can tell you, the people are much more in a better state of where those talk about that, those overcome this shyness of sharing the problem and sharing to the close people as well, community people as well, and linking with the community resources. Many people don't link with community resources because they think, oh, their problem would be known to other people from the same community. And those are the barriers. And I think this is a role of professionals to really encourage community to come forward, acknowledge, and let's find the solution for that. and see how other people are dealing with the similar problem.
Yeah.
And that's to learn rather than just keeping in silence and not talking about that or trying to do something, which is not. So it's again also community key communicators. Like our key communicators are imams, ulemas, mujtahideen, these like media channels. I think Ahlulbayt has been playing really a quite vital role in raising awareness to the community on many vital issues throughout the years. So they have responsibility to invite, to encourage people to come and speak. And we need to start these discussions in our religious discourses as well, to encourage people, to tell them that it's fine, let's talk about that. So these are the steps. Again, these problems cannot be resolved with one approach. Like if you try to just resolve by religious approach or spiritual guidance, that won't work. We need to be looking holistically, medical, social, spiritual, and religious point of view.
Yeah, I actually really like the point that you mentioned about the fact that we have a problem in our system, in the NHS and in the institutions as well, in Western medicine, when it comes to cultural intelligence.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of emotional intelligence, and I know we spoke about this
Yeah.
before. There's a lot of emotional intelligence. People get trained with emotional intelligence all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
But when it comes to cultural intelligence, there's a big deficit in our
Big
system.
deficit.
Yeah, and it affects a lot of ethnic minorities, like especially Muslims, because sometimes we do rituals in our communities or even our family structures are never quite understood well when it comes to professionals that come from different backgrounds, or even like being from a different background to the professional you're speaking to, you might feel like I don't want to speak about certain things that are actually very important to the life of the carer or to the life of the individual receiving care. So in that way, there's a pivotal role that the community plays, because in our community we share cultural kind of traditions, and so we understand one another, and professionals that come from that background have a role to play. But like you mentioned, mosques, communities, individuals.
Community.
But how then do we solve the problem of the community that might not have or might not be accessible so far? I think it's very, very good to say we need to start conversations, but there's a lot of people that won't know where to start, and there's still a lot of kind of discrimination towards disabilities and special needs, like when it comes to, like you said, like majalis, Husseiniat, and you can't really take, like for example, we spoke about this on the show where an autistic kid isn't really encouraged to go to a majlis because they might act out or the mother might be embarrassed. So how can the community deal with this? How can we move forward to make it more accessible, in your opinion?
I think again we need a massive awareness campaign, and it should be coming from, as I mentioned, key communicators. Key communicators are those people that we definitely listen to, and those are ulemas, scholars. And also, I think there are a lot of community organizations that people are not aware simply about that.
Yeah.
And they need to be really accessing those community resources. We need to share at community level those resources, like all the mosques or Imam Bargahs. I would suggest that there should be some regular courses or brief awareness sessions on different. I have been doing for many years on general anxiety and depression symptoms, and people have been benefiting from those things. But it's not just simple depression and anxiety. Problems are quite of different domains and complex dimensions. We need to, for example, drug addiction is a problem.
Yeah, definitely.
And our community is really, really suffering. It's really hard to really share this. Our suicide rates in youth are increasing. And that is a massive change, because previously, due to religiosity, our suicide rates were quite low than any other communities, but now those are on increase and in youth people. So we need to speak about these problems. And all media channels. Those are our community channels. And I would suggest that we have really strong system of communication. We need to be utilizing that. For example, if an alim speaks about something in a very structured way or very informative way, or maybe endorsing someone, that is much more of a acceptable information than if people listen that the similar stuff from a non-Muslim or
Yeah.
non-Asian or like African person.
Yeah. Definitely, and I think I definitely agree with you. It is about starting conversation and
Conversation.
raising awareness. And yeah, our kind of top committee members, like we say, with the
Yeah,
mosques and the community, they inshallah, we're kind of striving towards that path. And that's something this podcast is trying to do. And
yeah,
other
yeah, definitely.
organizations, like I don't know about if you've heard Amanati,
Yeah,
yeah, they work really hard in trying to start
yeah,
those conversations.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and inshallah, that's kind of where we're heading. So you spoke about your work sometimes with depression, generalized anxiety disorders, and other mental health disorders, and you've also worked with carers of physical kind of physical impairments as well. What do you think is the difference when it comes to caring or when it comes to social stigma with physical disabilities versus mental health disabilities?
I think mental health disability or problem has more of a stigma than physical. Like we have some level of acceptance about physical disability because it is defined. We can know that this is a disability, and then I think it's very interesting to mention here that in Islamic civilization, the acceptance for disabilities, even mental disabilities, have been really better state of affairs. Um, you would be amazed to know the first mental health hospital, not asylum, was set up in Baghdad
Oh,
many centuries
wow.
back, when in Europe there were like lunatics or so-called lunatics or mentally ill patients were used for begging on the streets,
Yeah.
and there used to be tickets to watch people who have some disability, mental or physical here.
Wow.
So in our cultures, that was the time where actually regular and structured hospitals were being set up for mentally ill people or disabled people. So I think we have been more accepting about physical disability in particular, but mental health stigma is still a problem. And that's why the new approach is that actually we should be moving away from diagnosis of depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and we need to be moving more towards the problems and what the individual needs are. Again, thinking in terms of needs rather than like what what's wrong
Yeah.
in a person, or something like which is strictly medical, stigmatized, diagnostic labels. So this is a change, and I think we should be hoping things would move towards better. Again, in terms of society or civilizational temperament, we have more acceptance about these things, and this is established or evidence through the history. So, so I think we have more of a, from a religious point of view, more humanistic approach. But the missing factor is that when we survive in a different society, actually problems become a bit lost, or attitudes or our approaches would be lost. We don't understand what our resources are, what our attitude is, and that is where actually we need education. People need really education, and education doesn't mean GCSEs or A levels or things like this. It's more of a communal awareness and education, and connecting or helping people to be connected towards to their original resources. Uh, like I'm not sure I wrote a book in 1992, I think it was published, on Muslim contribution to psychology and psychotherapy.
Oh, wow.
It was in Urdu language. It was ever first on that topic. When I was going through research, I came across such like eye-opening uh, like episodes of interventions, best medical practice, and more of a psychological and approach rather than pure physical approach. Many centuries back.
By
Muslims,
Muslims?
yeah, by Muslims.
Wow.
Yeah.
MashaAllah, yeah.
So but we don't know. I wasn't aware until I started like
Researching.
People are not aware that what our, and that's why Imam Ali is saying that actually disease is within yourself. Your remedy and treatment is within yourself.
Wow.
And that's the reality. We need to be looking into ourselves in as a civilization, that what we got to address these problems. So this is again awareness, and I would assign major responsibility to media and our key communicators, ulemas. They need to be starting to devote a time in the majalis for these issues. People should know that there's a portion of speech that would cover this issue. And this is how we can engage.
Definitely. It's normalizing it, right?
Normalizing, yeah.
It's talking about it, it's aiding individuals to have the accepting mindset. Because whether we like it or not, disability, special needs, it affects all of us as a collective anyways. And if we don't utilize individuals and give them their resources to increase their potential, because everyone has potential, right? And it's up to us how we deal with that potential. Either we could fulfill it or we could kind of push it down. So the importance of the collective is very, very important. Just use the word twice. So you really don't like this whole labeling thing, right?
Yeah.
You don't like labels. And I remember you spoke when we had the meeting earlier, you said that the labeling of individuals that might bring shame to the family.
It brings shame, stigma.
Shame and stigma. All of these things, if avoided, improves rehabilitation of the patient or the person with the special needs. What is kind of the importance of the support network then to improve the rehabilitation of these patients? And why is it so important, in your perspective, to avoid the label? So even when it comes to depression, I think you don't like to call people. You told me you don't like to say a patient is depressed.
Yeah, depressed. Yeah.
Why, in your perspective, is labeling not a very good thing?
The problem is that, number one, people don't have really good level of understanding about these problems. When someone says they have a mental health difficulty, people straight away think about a crazy person, like movies and media, someone is abnormal, which is not true. The reality is that depression and anxieties are so common presentations, and mostly the people who are fully functioning, more actively connected to the life, they are more likely to suffer that problem, and there are solutions. They need to reorganize, reschedule things. So that's the reason. The people think that they are going to be labeled as abnormal people, or in simple words like crazy people. And then there are some social disadvantages attached to those people. If you are, for example, established as a crazy person, you're not going to get married with anyone, no one is going to give you any job, no one is going to actually give you some social prestige or respect. So there are a lot of social disadvantages historically attached to these labels. So we need to avoid, and label is, like my experience is that many times labels are really not quite representative of the needs, and this is oversimplification of someone's problem, and not looking into their needs should be looked holistically. So and those needs can be maybe spiritual needs, and those can be maybe interpersonal needs, So that's why moving away from diagnosis or label is very important to support people to create a culture of which is need based, and needs, everyone has needs, and needs can be different on different occasions. It can, and those should be considered when a person is in whatever the time frame they are into. Needs should be looked around that area and holistically. So, this is the thing. I think a major barrier has been these diagnostic labels. People have been avoiding to say, and this is very interesting. Like, for example, during COVID, the major sufferer was people who were supporting communities. They were suffering emotional difficulties. They were seeing people dying. Doctors were seeing their colleagues dying. And people were really under a massive fear and emotional contagion, trauma. But people were avoiding to ask for help. I have seen professionals like avoiding, like I remember a psychiatrist who started having nightmares. And I spoke to him and I asked, would there be a possibility to start antidepressant medication at least? And he said no, he would prefer to commit suicide rather than using antidepressants.
Wow,
So this
and
is
he's a
psychiatrist's view.
psychiatrist.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you.
Wow.
Because, and I didn't know by then, they actually, if they start taking formal prescribed antidepressant, it will go on to their actually records. So a lot of things, like there are disadvantages associated historically, or there are a lot of myths associated to these mental health problems or disabilities even.
Yeah.
And that's why discrimination would happen, and discrimination would happen within the family even. So that's why when we talk about awareness and knowledge, it should be imparted to each and every family member. If they are children, they need to know this is our like brother, sister, or someone, and they have different needs. We need to support. How we are going to contribute? How we are going to help them to be happy? So their concept of happiness, or again, football might be different from a person who is playing in the field.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept about this whole the whole idea of labeling and diagnostic setbacks. So I know there's a lot of people that the whole opinions on whether or not we should label something, or we should diagnose something, or we should just treat it, or early intervention, late intervention, all of these things differs, right, between different professionals. But I definitely agree with you. I think there's a big problem when it comes to labeling someone, especially in our communities, of,
Exactly.
oh, you know, they're depressed, or they've got OCD, or they've got schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And there's, because of the lack of information and the education and the sort of ignorance sometimes that we have within our community, we don't know how to deal with individuals that are deemed depressed, or deemed to have generalized anxiety or schizophrenia,
Exactly.
when actually, more often than not, we live amongst them.
Yeah.
We don't even notice.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it's so fortunate. Sometimes they suffer in isolation because they don't want to tell us, because we do judge them,
Exactly.
unfortunately.
Exactly.
I was going to say they think we judge them, but we do actually
We do.
judge them,
We
unfortunately.
do.
So yeah, like with labeling, sometimes comes judgment, which is something that people avoid.
They would be judged. This is the sense. If I say that I'm depressed, straight away I would be judged.
Yeah.
And that's not just judgment. It will bring some disadvantages in one way or the other.
Yeah. And there's the whole idea of how can you be depressed when you've got everything going for you? Or how can you be depressed when you have Allah? Or how can you be depressed like being like this, or come from this family? And sometimes they ignore the whole, there might be an organic side to it, like a biological side.
Biological side, there can be, and sometimes there are multiple reasons. It's not that, God forbid, they have lost their faith into Allah. And that's the reason, actually. It's like physical health problem. You can suffer fever, you can have anything which is related to any infection. And it's fine. You need to just find solution, and solution should be holistic again.
Yeah, and family play a big role in that, and community plays a very pivotal role in that too. And so do spiritual leaders, and like you said, the whole community communicators. So we're nearing to the end of the show, unfortunately. So why don't you give us your kind of parting advice to the listeners and the viewers, and anything you want to leave us with, inshallah.
Just two messages which I have already mentioned. Number one, start talking about these problems. The more you talk, the more you would be getting really clarity. And again, don't hesitate to ask for professional help. Contact your GP or whoever is the care provider. Don't hesitate. And think of that. Like many people I have seen, they would just go for some spiritual healing rather than going for to speak to GP or sort of thing. And again, there are a lot of fears associated. If we do that, something would happen or something we would lose. The more talking and acceptance, and also coming out of this sense of inferiority there. If we have someone with special needs, that means we are of less worth now as a family, as a like community. It's not. And just making that as a source of power, a source of blessing, you can make that for that person as well, for yourself as well. So don't try to hide or cover up. Speak about that and take that as a source of like power and spiritual enhancement, I would say. And also, don't suffer in isolation. It's not one person's responsibility. Everyone is responsible, and everyone needs to play to help that person who is in need of some special arrangements or special care. So these are the basic things. We need to not to suffer in isolation. This is the one line. And for that, know more about that, accept that, and then look after yourself as well. Because if you don't look after yourself because of one reason or the other, it is going to impact on everyone.
I think there's so many important topics that we've touched on today, and the whole idea of the well-being of carers, that sometimes is overlooked in our community.
This is too much overlooked.
Yeah, it's very overlooked, and I think you see that a lot in your kind of field of work, specifically, and the role of community and awareness and education when it comes to the actual individual that requires special needs, or and I really like the way you say that we all have special needs in some way.
Every human being has different needs.
Yeah, and it's just how we deal with it, and it's the mindset to move forward with, and the education to have. So I think those two are very, very important takeaway points. And inshallah, this is something that our community can work and strive towards.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of good work which is emerging. People are working, which is like people are developing more resources. I think we should be very optimistic, and everyone should come out and contribute and try to help others as well.
Yeah, inshallah. And everyone who's listening to this and all the viewers have a role to play. And this responsibility that you mentioned is something that we should all share.
Yeah, it's shared responsibility. It's not one person. And this is not because of any punishment or some bad luck. It is a challenge, and let's take. And sabr is the best, I think, philosophy, and it's very practical philosophy. I think when I started treating people, I could really understand what does that mean. Sabr. And sabr is with positive approach, attitude, acceptance, and empowerment, basically.
Yeah, and empowerment is so important for people, and it's a skill set to have, and it's something that people work towards and trying to learn and adopt. So alhamdulillah that we're able to talk about these topics, and inshallah we're part of the process that educates and communicates and does something for the future, inshallah. So thank you very much, Dr. Sayyid Ali Naqvi, for being on the show today. It's been an absolute honor to have you, and it's something that I think was so important to be discussed, so many really, really important topics, and unfortunately, we only have an hour. Otherwise, we could be talking for so much
Yeah,
more.
I think there are different areas that we can speak.
Yeah,
But it's just a good beginning, I think.
yeah, definitely good beginning.
To really touch base on different areas.
Definitely, and it's addressing these topics. So thank you very much to the viewers and the listeners also who are watching, and inshallah you have been able to kind of learn something and learn from Dr. Zaid Ali Nakhvi about our roles in society and our community. So thank you very much again to the Sayyid, and thank you to the viewers for listening, and inshallah we'll be able to see you next week for another episode of Out of Sight. Thank you very much. Ma'as salama.